The Rocketeer is a love letter to the adventure and sci-fi serials of the World War II era. The hero, while he has his flaws, is clearly good, and the villain, while he has his innate charm, is clearly evil. Dave Stevens tried to accomplish a similar thing in the Rocketeer comic book in 1982, recapturing the magic and sense of adventure of mass consumerist entertainment of the 30s and 40s, going as far as lifting nearly the entire concept and costume from period serials. The movie is largely faithful to the comics, keeping the style and spirit true to the original, but making it more family-friendly. For instance, Jenny in the film is a struggling actress rather than a nude model. Both versions make myriad period pop culture references, and part of the fun is trying to catch them all. It didn't perform well at the box office, which isn't altogether surprising when you consider that Disney tried to heavily merchandise the film to kids. And in 1991, when Batman and the Ninja Turtles were hot, a hero rooted in the tradition of Buck Rogers and Commando Cody probably wasn't going to appeal to enough kids to make it a success. No, this was a nostalgic romp for the adults who grew up with the serials, pulps, and comics, and for younger adults fascinated with the period. I was in the age group Disney was trying to target with this movie, and I remember seeing it and thinking it was boring. I just didn't get what was so exciting about a guy with a primitive jetpack strapped to his back when all the other modern superheroes seem so much more exciting. So now that I've got a little historical perspective and an appreciation for the atmosphere the movie is trying to set, I thoroughly enjoyed this film. It's not especially deep or anything, but again, it's trying to be a 1930s movie serial, not an extensive historical study on them. What makes it really work is that it embraces a lot of the familiar and even the formulaic elements of classic adventure films, and finds clever ways to make them fresh again. I'm going to primarily focus on those elements and on how the Rocketeer functions as a superhero, or more accurately, as a proto-superhero. And even though it's mostly a nostalgic ride down memory lane, we'll also see if there's anything going on under the surface of these simple, archetypal characters. Like a lot of sci-fi and adventure serials, the plot of the film focuses on several parties trying to get their hands on an artifact, in this case, the rocket. It was built by Howard Hughes, delightfully played by none other than Los Terry O'Quinn, and winds up in the wrong hands. As we saw in the Fleischer Superman cartoons, there was a fascination during World War II with stories about futuristic technology and the terrible things our enemies might do with it. As we were deeply terrified by what we might imagine Hitler would do with an atomic weapon. Sometimes action movies will substitute this formula for character development. Everyone is trying to nab the doomsday device or the ancient, powerful artifact that can destroy the world, and it oftentimes comes off too easy. That's been going on a long time, and it can be even more glaring these days when a movie's substance is all about an artifact because so many video game plots revolve around that same formula. But the Rocketeer walks a fine line between copying an old style and also telling a good story. Even though there's an artifact, it isn't vague, and our hero isn't the one looking for it the whole movie. He stumbles on it accidentally when a mob thug hides in an airplane, played by none other than veteran character actor Max Grodachik, best known for playing the bumbling Rom on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. The rocket has historical relevance, not a mystical object, but something that could conceivably be built in the tradition of science fiction. It functions much like Tony Stark's Iron Man armor. The government wants it, the bad guys want it, and whoever possesses it instantly has power over their enemies. A lot of the themes and story elements in this film are present in the Iron Man movies, in fact, the main difference being that the man who built the suit, or rocket pack in this case, isn't the superhero himself. Tony Stark has sometimes been referred to as a modern Howard Hughes, and if you look at a picture of the real Howard Hughes, you can see where the producers were going in Iron Man 2 when they cast Howard Stark, not to mention, of course, why Tony's father is named Howard. The Rocketeer has a lot of subgenres before it's a superhero film, not the least of which is alternate history. So the actual Howard Hughes is used and made integral to the story, rather than creating a fictional character based on him. And to go with the over-the-top fun of the serials, of course, he's got to be an action hero flying around in one of his planes toward the end. The Germans try to duplicate his invention and fail time and again, so they send spies to America hoping to steal plans or a prototype. When Howard Hughes finds out the mob has stolen his prototype, he burns the plans and says he wishes he'd never built it. It's interesting that the villain of the story, a character based on Errol Flynn called Neville Sinclair, has to be presented as a purely fictional character because otherwise, viewers unfamiliar with Errol Flynn's real history might get the impression that the movie is saying he was actually a Nazi spy. This is a clever reference to Charles Hingham's fabricated biography of Flynn, where he was accused of really being a Nazi spy and a number of other awful things, and it wasn't until just before this film was made that the book was completely refuted. Sinclair manages to become, as he says in a line of dialogue, the third biggest name in Hollywood, without anyone knowing who he really is. He hires the Valentine gang to steal the rocket, and then to find it once it's lost to Cliff. And it isn't until the third act that even Eddie Valentine knows he's a Nazi spy, at which point Valentine turns on him because he says, "I may not make an honest buck, but I'm 100% American." One of the best scenes in the film has Howard Hughes revealing an animated Nazi propaganda video that a soldier died to get into the hands of the US government, where we discover what the Nazis are up to, planning to rule the world by equipping every Nazi soldier with Hughes' rocket. It's a perfect replica of the kinds of military video campaigns being made at the time. The implication seems to be that if the Nazis had that technology, they could easily fly wherever they wanted to and ambush every country in the world. Though I found myself questioning how they would have enough fuel in their packs to get from Germany to wherever they were going, how they'd have enough food, and why having a rocket pack would automatically mean success. I mean, it would be a huge advantage in ground combat, but the rocket packs don't have any weapons attached to them. Even several hundred of them would hardly be a match for a fleet of jets. But I digress. As I said, I see the Rocketeer as a kind of proto-superhero. He has a lot in common with traditional superheroes, but he's set in an age where superheroes are just getting off the ground. It's 1938, which was Superman's very first year. So when he's first spotted and all the newspapers are talking about him, it's a really big deal. The Rocketeer opens the imagination of every kid who learns about him. He's got something akin to a costume, he can fly, and he saves people. For all intents and purposes, to them, he is Superman. And this is another place where the film walks the line between adventure picture from the 30s and modern storytelling. Most of your pulp, serial, and even feature film adventure heroes could do no wrong, like the majority of Errol Flynn's characters. Ironic, then, that Neville Sinclair is the dastardly villain who always plays the swashbuckling hero on screen. More on that later. But the hero of this movie is a typical headstrong young man from the period, a guy just trying to make a living and be happy. He flies planes in local air shows, kind of a small town hero. Everyone comes out to see him fly, but the town's admiration and respect doesn't put food on the table, so when his plane is shot down in a shootout between the police and the Valentine gang over the rocket, but the loss of the plane is detrimental, and he and his older partner Peavy are out of luck. By the way, Peavy is kind of a father figure who warns Cliff against using the rocket in the first place, but backs him up throughout the film like any father would, as Cliff makes up for his mistakes and uses the rocket to save the day. He's played by Alan Captain Invincible Arkin. He has a lot more in common with Spider-Man than he does Superman. He has real-world problems, and he does his best to cope with them. He's dating the most beautiful girl in town, but he doesn't really get women, and in typical screen romance fashion, she gets angry with him for not telling her that he almost blew up an airplane. This is certainly more understandable than the stuff Mary Jane gets angry with Peter for in the Spider-Man movies. If I almost died in a plane crash and my wife found out about it from random people about town, she probably wouldn't be real happy with me either. And when his luck changes and he finds the rocket, he does the same thing he would have done had he been bitten by a radioactive spider and gained its abilities. He plans to make some money with it, hoping to use it in an air show. It doesn't immediately dawn on him to use it to save people. He does the first thing anyone would do, really. He tries to figure out how to use his discovery to fix his immediate problems. But also like Spider-Man, Cliff is a noble character, and as soon as he figures out how to fly the rocket, after the inevitable Iron Man-esque sequence of him flying around, banging into stuff, trying to get the hang of it, and people are in danger, especially those he cares about, he comes to the rescue. What makes the Rocketeer more than just a nostalgia fest is that Cliff becomes an icon accidentally. He never set out to be a superhero, and it could be argued that he really isn't one, he just fills the role when it's necessary. He doesn't wear a mask, he wears a helmet, a distinction that's very clearly made in the film. He asks Peavy to build him a helmet, and he thinks it looks silly when it's done, but he wears it because he needs something to shield his face when he flies, and because Peavy built a rudder on it so he can use his head to steer. It functions as a mask though, but like finding the rocket in the first place, this also happens accidentally. He couldn't fly the thing if he didn't wear it. Unlike most superheroes, he didn't build his secret identity on purpose. It just happened, but in a pretty believable way. This guy is making it all up as he goes. He's impulsive, so he acts quickly and uses his wits to solve immediate problems, but he doesn't think more than one step ahead. Even though the film is presenting him as the world's first superhero, fictional or otherwise in this universe it seems, it finds ways to take these superhero tropes and to stand them on their head. After all, this won't be the first superhero the audience has ever seen. Cliff not only doesn't go the whole movie hiding that he's the Rocketeer from Jenny until the last minute, but she's never even heard of the Rocketeer by the time he tells her about it. Cliff seems to screw up her chances of making it big in Hollywood by accidentally knocking over the walls on a movie set she's working on as an extra. This ticks off Neville Sinclair and he tells someone to ban her from the lot. But then he overhears Cliff telling her about the rocket, so he changes his mind and takes her out to dinner and says he's going to make her into a leading lady, trying to seduce her, so she'll tell him where the rocket is. She's been with Sinclair the whole time the Rocketeer comes out in the newspaper, so the scene where the hero tells his big secret to his girlfriend, played countless different ways on screen and in comics, is wonderfully parodied here. Cliff tells her, "This may come as a shock, but I'm the Rocketeer." To which she responds, "The Rocket who?" This is really indicative of their whole relationship. He's a little slow on the uptake, and she's quick on the draw. He loves her because she's beautiful and brilliant, and she's also not a typical helpless small-town girl, though I'm not sure he's even figured that part out yet. And she loves him because what he lacks in common sense he makes up for in talent and nobility. He's a great pilot, and he's an honorable person who does make a lot of mistakes, but he always tries to fix them. Sure, they're a pretty stereotypical couple, but part of that is the genre. Even though they don't spend a whole lot of time on screen together, the romance unfolds naturally, and the audience isn't beaten over the head with romantic conflict like we are in the Spider-Man and Fantastic Four films. This isn't even really a superhero origin story, because much to my surprise, Cliff isn't a superhero at the end of the film. After he's beaten the bad guy in the big climactic action scene on the Nazi Zeppelin, he goes back to his day job flying airplanes. Howard Hughes shows up and gives him a brand new plane as a thank you for defeating Sinclair and returning the rocket to its rightful owners. And a new plane is all he ever really wanted. He does the right thing, and so the narrative gives him what he wants. As small a desire as it might seem. Another hero would have a hard time giving up the fame of being the Rocketeer, and he does bask in that for a minute, but ultimately he's a simple guy and he doesn't have those sorts of aspirations. It's interesting that a movie patterned after serials is such a standalone story. Disney had hoped it would be successful enough to warrant a franchise, and it's hard to imagine what would plausibly happen to get Cliff back in the rocket pack. I really expected Hughes to reveal the rocket to him at the end and say something like, "I know you thought you were done, son, but your country needs you again." But that's not what happens at all, and it's just as well. Cliff doesn't really see himself as a hero. He sees himself as someone who did the right thing, what anyone in his position would have done. That's what makes him a sympathetic protagonist and also someone to look up to. The most interesting thing for me is that the two main characters besides Cliff are pretenders, and he's not. It's ironic, then, that he's the only one who wears a mask. Jenny wants to be an actress. She wants to pretend for a living. Neville Sinclair is an actor. He does pretend for a living, and to take this idea of pretending to its fullest extreme, he's also pretending to be an actor. Jenny is the character with the real, obvious character arc. She becomes disillusioned with the world of Hollywood and realizes that raw talent alone won't necessarily get her where she wants to be, which she first starts to figure out when she sees that the director's niece of the Sinclair picture she's an extra in gets the leading lady role, even though she can't deliver a line naturally to save her life. She becomes fully disillusioned when she finds that Neville Sinclair isn't interested in her because of her talent and her beauty, but because she knows something about where the rocket is. Her best line, perhaps the best in the film in fact, comes when she craftily asks Neville to help her out of her dress after he kidnaps her, and then she hits him in the face with a flower vase. When he's knocked out, she says, "I finally played a scene with Neville Sinclair." It's fun to see her beat him at his own game, acting. And at the same time, this is when she realizes maybe this isn't the world she wants to live in. We aren't told by the end if she continues acting or not, but after her experience, I kinda doubt it. Cliff is unlike the superheroes who seem to be different people in and out of costume, like Superman, Batman, and even Spider-Man, who's more confident in the suit than out of it. He's always the same brash, strong-willed kid, no matter what he's wearing. Even though he knows nobody is aware that he's the Rocketeer, he doesn't try very hard to conceal his identity. In the third act, when he shows up to face down Sinclair to rescue Jenny, he immediately takes his helmet off. He knows who he is, and he's completely comfortable with it. He's not perfect like most period movie heroes, but he is stagnant like they are. Sure, he learns some things, but he's the same at the end of the movie as he is at the beginning. He's the only major character who isn't acting and has no interest in it. And that's the movie pushing forward an ideal of simplicity. Whether you like that ideal or not, it kind of works here because it's very much what the movies in the time it's set in were doing. And then you've got Neville Sinclair on the opposite end of the spectrum from Jenny, the actor inside of an actor. He has a great line that sums up his character as well, when, in the final action scene, Jenny says to him, "Everything you were was a lie," to which he responds, "It wasn't a lie, it was acting." Sinclair isn't the deepest of villains, to be sure. We never really understand his motivations beyond he's a loyal Nazi, so he spies and does horrible things for his country. But the commentary he brings on the movie industry is really interesting. The idea that any deceitful action can be justified by its broad social acceptance. People like movies, so they like actors. So they like acting. And acting is like lying in that you're pretending you're someone you're not. So if you make a leap in logic, you can say people like liars as long as they're also actors. What this is really saying is, if you're popular enough, people might forgive you for anything, maybe even for being a Nazi spy. Neville may have been pretending to be an American actor, but he was still most certainly an actor, and a very good one on multiple levels. When Neville uses the rocket and it blows up because Cliff removed a piece of gum that was a quick fix for a mechanical problem, he lands on the Hollywood sign and blows up the land part. Another great example of alternate history, by the way. In reality, the Hollywood sign actually said Hollywoodland until 1949, when the city of Los Angeles began a project to restore the sign, and land was removed to reflect the district instead of the housing development. It's extremely clever and a great image, but I wonder if it also reflects the themes inherent in Neville's character, and I like to read too far into things, so I will. Hollywood is a place where movies are made, whereas a place called Hollywoodland sounds more like a theme park, a magical place where dreams come true. Ginny finds that the real Hollywood is a cutthroat environment, a far cry from the dream where anyone with talent can show up and become a star. Neville, the fake who pretends to be a symbol of the naive idea of Hollywood, crashes into the Hollywoodland sign and strips it down, revealing the naked truth. It's not a magical place where dreams come true. It's a business, just like everything else. I wonder if the filmmakers had that idea in mind, or if I'm just making stuff up. Once again, because of the genre, I don't think we can expect a real deep and sympathetic villain. That would have gone against the tradition of this kind of film, but the commentary helps to set him apart. What I find a little frustrating about this movie are the things I'd criticize in another film that are hard to criticize here because a lot of them could be chalked up to doing a piece in an outdated genre. I find the pacing to be a little inconsistent. It moves along at a decent clip at the beginning, then it drags in the middle, and then it really takes off at the end once it's revealed that Neville is a Nazi spy. A lot of the middle section is Neville seducing Jenny and the mob trying to find Cliff. But this reflects the pacing of a lot of serials. If you put all the episodes together and look at them as a cohesive piece, a lot of the middle part of serials is the bad guys standing around in their lair making plans and thugs running around doing their dirty work. So since this movie is a little modern and a lot throwback, it's hard to say whether that's a problem. And as I said, we could spend more time with Cliff, get to know him better, make him a little less the stereotypical hot-headed flyboy, but it's consistent with the genre. But then again, his girlfriend isn't so typical. She pretends to be, and that's part of her acting motif, but she's not the damsel in distress like you might expect. Cliff goes to rescue her in the usual girlfriend gets kidnapped plot, but she does a lot to try to rescue herself, hitting Neville, not to mention using a gun. And then there's the Way Neville Dies. Cliff removes the gum from the rocket before Neville gets his hands on it, and doesn't warn him before he uses it. He just lets him fly off and blow himself up, knowing what's going to happen. In a modern film, we might criticize him for letting the villain die, and we'd speculate even whether or not this counts as killing the villain. In the late 30s, we probably wouldn't mind because it's more black and white. The good guys live, the bad guys die. Plus, he's a Nazi, and they're the worst evil the world's ever seen, so we might even think he ought to die. So we've got a movie both embracing and breaking stereotypes, finding ways to make new out of the old, and that makes it really hard for me to criticize it on really anything. Ultimately, I think some of the nostalgia could be sacrificed for a more tightly paced film, and if we can have a non-typical girl, we can have a less typical hero, one who at least warns the villain that his rocket's going to blow up, villain or not. It's the Rocketeer's 20th anniversary this year, and sadly it doesn't look like we're going to get any sort of special edition DVD, even though the current version has no special features or commentaries. I really like to see a making-of featurette and hear from some of the actors who worked on this. I'm going to give The Rocketeer a 3 out of 4. It's the kind of movie that exists to make you feel all warm and fuzzy about the past, and it succeeds at that, but it also manages to make a statement about the very medium it's presented in. It isn't a perfect movie, but it does do a great job at doing something different and clever with familiar ideas. Ba, ba, ba.